When my father died, my brothers inherited his $18 million empire, mansions, yachts, cars. I received a small dusty envelope. Mocked and humiliated, I opened it alone that night. Inside there was only a sheet of paper with a bank account number. And one line, "This is for the son who should have never existed." And when I checked the balance, my brothers got $18 million. I received a dusty envelope. What I found inside the reading of my father's will last at exactly 17 minutes. I know, because I counted every second, watching the grandfather clock in the corner of the study as my brothers divided an empire valued at $18 million. My name is Preston Torna, though the surname part always comes with an asterisk. I am 28 years old, and I have spent all those years being reminded that I am the son who shouldn't exist. My father, Victor Torna, built his real estate empire from nothing, or at least, that's what the Forbes article said. He died 5 days ago at his desk. His hands still gripping a pen signing contracts until his heart gave out. The man worked himself to death, and somehow that seemed fitting. He lived his entire life in transaction mode, everything measured in profit and loss, including his children, especially me. The lawyer Raymond Finch sat across from us at the mahogany table, his veined hands organizing documents with routine precision. To my left was my older brother Garrett, 35, already wearing our father's Rolex that he had claimed from the body. To my right, Holden, 32, was testing his wife, deciding which property they would live in first. And then there was me, the illegitimate son, the reminder of our father's single moment of weakness with his secretary 29 years ago, the Manhattan properties, including the 3 penthouses on Fifth Avenue and the 2 commercial buildings in Rebecca, valued at $8 million. I leave to my son, Garrett Finch, read his monotone voice echoing in the wood-paneled room. Garrett smirked with satisfaction and poured himself another glass of my father's century-old whiskey. Finally, the old man recognized who really ran the New York operations, the Hamptons estate, the entire collection of yachts, including the Celestial Dream and all vehicles in the Long Island Depot, valued at $7 million. I leave to my son. Holden laughed out loud. Cars. Miranda is going to lose her mind. There's a 1967 Ferrari in that collection worth $2 million on its own. They continued to carve up the empire like children sorting Halloween candy. Stock portfolios, Swiss accounts, art collections, even the corporate jet. Every few minutes one of them would shoot me a look of thinly veiled amusement, waiting for my name to be called. We all knew it was coming. The question was, how little would it be? To Preston, Finch finally said. My 2 brothers leaned forward like vultures sensing what was coming. Finch reached into his executive briefcase and pulled out a single-aged brown envelope, slightly increased at the corners. My name was written on the front in a shaky script that must have been my father's at the end of his life. I leave this envelope to be opened in private, containing what my son needs to know. The silence lasted for maybe 3 seconds before Garrett erupted in laughter, spilling his whiskey. An envelope, gasped, laughing so hard he could barely speak. 2 years of pretending your family and dad leaves you a letter. Holden was more restrained, but his eyes shone with cruel satisfaction. Maybe it's a thank you card. Thanks for knowing your place, kid. Here's a hallmark moment for your troubles, or instructions to the nearest unemployment office. Garrett added, already testing the news, to someone chuckling at the joke. Wait until the board hears about this. Finch handed me the envelope with something that might have been sympathy in his eyes. It weighed nothing. 28 years of trying to earn a place in this family. And it all came down to something that weighed less than a credit card bill. Gentlemen, Finch continued, ignoring the laughter. Your father insisted I read this final statement. He adjusted his glasses and read. Blood may determine lineage, but character determines worth. I trust each of you will receive exactly what you deserve. My brothers were too drunk on victory to notice the strangeness of the phrase. They were already arguing over who would get their father's office at headquarters. I slipped the envelope into my jacket pocket, stood up without a word, and walked toward the door. Preston, Garrett shouted. If you need a job, maybe there's an opening in building maintenance. You'd have to start in the basement, but you're already used to being beneath us, right? Kept walking. The laughter followed me through the marble foyer, past the portraits of Torna ancestors, and out into the October afternoon, where my 10-year-old Honda sat parked between their Maserati. Is like the punchline. No one needed to say. Inside that envelope was a bank account number in 11 words that would unravel 25 years of lies. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that I was done begging for scraps from their table. I sat in the car with the engine off, staring at the envelope with my name written. by a dying hand, and wondered what final insult my father had saved for the end. I never belonged to the Torna family, and everyone made sure I knew it. From the time I could understand words, I understood that I was different, lesser tolerated, but never truly accepted. My earliest memory is of Garrett, then 10 years old, explaining to his private school friends why I lived in their house. "That's Preston," he said, pointing at me playing alone in the corner. "Dad's mistake with the secretary. We keep him around because Dad feels guilty." My mother Diane Russo died when I was 3, a car accident on the Long Island Expressway. That's what I was told. Single vehicle, brake failure, tragic but simple. She had been Victor's secretary for 5 years, and from their affair, I was born the living proof of my father's one lapse in judgment. Victor's legal wife had already died of cancer 2 years before I was born. So when Diane died, took me in not out of love, as I later learned, but out of obligation. Torna Mansion in Westchester had 32 rooms of cold marble and impossible standards. While Garrett and Holden had their names carved into their bedroom doors, mine simply said Guest Room 3 at family dinners. I sat at the far end of the table, close enough to be present, but far enough to be forgotten. Victor would ask his sons about their days at Princeton, their internships at the company, their opinions on market trends. To me, he would sometimes just nod and ask if I needed anything for school. "No, sir," was always the answer, even when I did. Holden was more subtle in his cruelty than Garrett, but also more effective. Where Derek used brute force, Holden used surgical precision. He would invite me along with his friends, only to spend the time explaining why I couldn't participate. "Preston can't come to the country club. Guys, they require legitimate members or my favorite. Preston understands why he can't be in the family photos. It would confuse the investors." I learned to be useful to survive. When Garrett needed someone to write his college essays, I did it. When Holden needed someone to take the blame for crashing the Mercedes, I took it. When Victor needed someone to work 18-hour days at the company, without complaint or recognition, I was there. I became fluent in the language of servitude, believing that if I just worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, maybe one day Victor would look at me the same way he looked at them, but it never happened. At Torna Industries board meetings, I was introduced as a protege or a special project. At charity balls as a young man, Victor mentors, never a son, never a family. I watched him pose for photos with Garrett and Holden at corporate events, while I held their coats off camera. I heard him tell associates about his 2 sons while I stood less than 5 feet away, invisible. The absurdity was that I outmatched them both in every measurable way. While Garrett and Holden coasted through their Ivy League educations, admitted by legacy and maintaining mediocre grades, I earned my place at MIT on merit scholarships. While they showed up to board meetings hungover and unprepared, I built my own consulting firm from scratch, landing 6-figure contracts by the age of 25. My clients included Fortune 500 companies that would laugh Garrett out of the room, but none of it mattered. "You can't legitimize yourself through achievement," to once told me closest to an acknowledgement he ever gave. "What you are, Preston, accept it." And I tried. I dated a woman named Rebecca for 2 years without ever introducing her to the family. How do you explain that you are both a tornado and not one? I rented a small apartment in Brooklyn despite theoretically having access to various family properties. I built a life parallel to the Torna Empire, like a satellite that orbits, but never lands. Then Victor began to get sick. The heart problem started last year, and despite the best doctors money could buy, we all knew time was running out. Garrett and Holden started circling him like sharks, visiting more frequently. Suddenly interested in their father's stories and advice, they spoke openly about their inheritance plans in front of me, debating which properties they would keep in, which they would sell. "What do you think Preston will get?" I heard Miranda hold on. His wife asked at a family dinner. "Whatever it is," Holden replied, not bothering to lower his voice, "it'll be more than he deserves." The call about Victor's death came while I was reviewing client contracts. Massive heart attack at his desk. His secretary said they found him slumped over acquisition papers and still in hand. Somehow that detail saddened me more than the death itself. The man died exactly as he lived, alone with his work, measuring value in square feet and profit margins. 5 days later, standing in that study, watching my brothers celebrate their fortune, I realized I had spent my entire life trying to earn the love of a man who had none to give, not for them, not for me, not even for himself. The will reading was scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. I arrived at the estate 15 minutes early, parking my Honda behind a catering truck, unloading champagne. Garrett and Holden had already started the celebration, apparently confident enough in their inheritance to hire party planners before the reading. I found them in the study with their wives drinking from Victor's collection of rare whiskeys and dividing up assets on cocktail napkins like kids trading baseball cards. Garrett's wife Simone was on FaceTime with a real estate agent touring a penthouse in Milan. Miranda, Holden's wife, had spread yacht catalogs across Victor's desk, circling upgrades for boats she hadn't yet inherited. "Who decided to show up?" Garrett announced as I entered, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Come to watch how the real heirs inherit." "I'm just here for the reading," I replied, taking a seat in the corner, in the same chair I had always occupied during family meetings. "Smart to manage expectations," Holden added, not looking up from his phone where he was apparently already listing one of the properties he expected to inherit. "Though I am curious what Dad left you. My bet is on that broken Rolex. He never got fixed. Seems poetic giving the broken son the broken watch." The lawyer Raymond Finch entered at exactly 2 o'clock. His presence shifting the room's energy from casual cruelty to formal business. He had been Victor's lawyer for 30 years, and had structured the entire legal foundation of Torna Industries. If anyone knew Victor's secrets, it was Finch. "Gentlemen, ladies," he said, nodding to the wives, "let us begin." He opened his leather briefcase with practical efficiency, pulling out a thick folder marked with Victor's seal. The will was surprisingly short for such a vast estate. Victor had always been a man of few words. The last will and testament of Victor Edmund Torna, executed 3 months prior to his death, superseding all previous documents. Finch began, his voice heavy with formality. The first 10 minutes went exactly as everyone expected. Garrett inherited the Manhattan real estate portfolio, $8 million in prime properties, including buildings that generated nearly $1 million a month in rent. He let out aloud when Finch read the address as already calculating expansion possibilities. Holden received the Hamptons estate where we spent summers. The entire yacht collection, including 3 vessels, valued at over $1 million each, and Victor's entire vehicle collection with vintage cars worthy of a museum. $7 million in toys for a man who never worked an honest day in his life. The liquid assets were also divided the stock portfolios. The offshore accounts, Victor thought no one knew about. Each brother walked away with millions more in investments in cash. Simone was already testing her friends, planning a celebration party at the Met. Miranda was logging into a yacht club website to register for mooring spots in Monaco. To Preston Finch finally read, and the room fell into an expectant silence. He reached into his briefcase once more, and pulled out a single-aged brown envelope, increased at the corners as if it had been handled many times. My name was written on the front in Victor's handwriting, but shaky, as if his hands no longer had strength. "I leave this envelope to be opened in private, maintaining what he needs to know." The laughter was immediate and thunderous. Garrett actually fell back into his chair, spilling whiskey on Victor's Persian rug. Holden was more composed of his smirk, said it all in envelope. Garrett gasped between laughs. 2 years of sucking up for a piece of paper. "Maybe it's a coupon." Simone suggested, joining the joke. 10% off your next therapy session for daddy issues or directions to the nearest homeless shelter, Miranda added. "Since he won't be living in the guest house anymore." Finch handed me the envelope without meeting my eyes. It was impossibly light, as if filled with air. 28 years in that family and my entire inheritance weighed less than a birthday card. "Gentlemen, there is one additional item," Finch continued, his voice cutting through the cackles. "Your father insisted I read this statement." He adjusted his glasses and read from a separate sheet. "Blood may determine lineage, but character determines worth, I trust. Each of you will receive exactly what you deserve." Pompous to the very end, Garrett muttered, already pouring another glass. "At least we deserve millions, while Preston deserves stationery." They were too drunk on victory to notice Finch's expression as he read those words, the way his eyes lingered on them as if he knew something we didn't. They were too busy planning their new lives to wonder why Victor had insisted on that specific phrase being read aloud. I got up to leave the envelope, burning a hole in my pocket. "Preston," Holden called out as I reached the door. "When you open it, let us know if it's at least nice paper. Maybe you can frame it and hang it in whatever little apartment you end up in." The laughter followed me out of the house, past the catering crew, setting up for the celebration, past the portraits of Torna patriarchs who never acknowledged me, and into the October afternoon where my Honda awaited math, only honest thing in my life. I sat in the car for an hour with the engine of staring at that envelope as if it might explode. Part of me wanted to tear it up without opening it to preserve what little Dignity I had left by refusing to play Victor's final humiliating game. But curiosity is stronger than pride, especially when you've spent your life searching for answers. The driveway was empty, except for the catering trucks. Through the estate windows, I could see the party starting silhouettes of my brothers and their friends raising glasses to their good fortune. I turned the envelope over in my hands, feeling the quality of the paper. It was old, maybe several decades, the kind of thick cardstock no one uses anymore. Finally, I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper folded once. The message was handwritten in Victor's careful script, but firmer than the writing on the envelope. As if this had been written years ago when his hands were still strong. Preston, this is for the boy who was never supposed to exist. Account number 44782911163, Zurich, Liberty Bank. Your mother knew why that was it? No explanation, no fatherly wisdom, no apology. Just a Swiss bank account number and a reference to my dead mother. I read it 5 times trying to wring meaning from those few words, the boy who was never supposed to exist, even in his final message to me, couldn't resist reminding me that I was a mistake. I drove back to my apartment in Brooklyn, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe it was a small trust fund. Just enough to show he thought of me, but of no real consequence. Maybe it was symbolic. $100 to match the 100 ways he denied me, or maybe it was nothing closed account. One last joke from beyond the grave. My laptop was open on the kitchen table where I'd left it that morning. Working on a presentation for a client I might never finish. I navigated to the Zurich Liberty Bank website. The discreet logo promised the Swiss banking privacy that had hidden fortunes for centuries. The login process was simpler than I expected. The account number, my social security number, and a security question. Mother's maiden name, Russo, Diane Russo, the secretary, who had made the mistake of falling for her boss. Before I checked the balance, before I found out what Victor's final insult would be, I stopped. There was something else in a message that bothered me. Your mother knew why I had never looked deeply into my mother's death. Why would I? It was a car accident when I was 3, tragic but simple, but Victor's words suggested something more, something my mother knew. I minimized the bank's website and opened the New York State Accident Database. Took a while, but I found it. October 15, 1999, Diane Russo, single vehicle accident, Long Island Expressway. Basic report was what I'd always been told. Brake failure. Car went off the road, fatal on impact. There was a detailed investigation file attached, something I'd never known about. I downloaded it, my hands starting to shake as I read the notes from the investigating officer. Brake line appears to have been deliberately severed. Tool marks consistent with intentional damage. Recommendation for homicide. Investigation closed at request of the family. See attached authorization. The authorization was signed by Victor Torna. My father had closed the investigation into my mother's murder. My fingers fumbled as I called Raymond Finch. He answered on the first ring as if he'd been waiting. Preston. His voice was cautious, measured. I assume you've opened it. What the hell is this, Finch? What did Victor know about my mother's death? There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, choosing his words. Can only tell you what Victor authorized me to check the account first. Then you'll understand why your mother died. Truth has waited 25 years. Tell me now, I demanded. But the line was already dead. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the computer screen. The accident report was still open in one tab, bank's website in another. My mother had been murdered, Victor knew. Somehow a Swiss bank account was going to explain it all. I clicked back to the bank site. My heart was pounding so hard. I could feel it in my throat. The account dashboard loaded slowly, each second stretching into an hour. When the balance finally appeared, I had to blink several times to make sure I was seeing the numbers correctly. Couldn't be possible. It had to be a mistake. I refreshed the page once, twice, 3 times, but the number remained the same. The phone rang, shattering the shock. An unknown international number. Mr. Preston. The voice was aged with a formal German accent. My name is Heinrich Dick. I have waited 25 years for you to access this account. I believe it is time you knew the truth about your mother, your father, the $18 million your brothers just inherited. I looked back at the screen at the impossible number, staring back at me, and realized my entire life had been built on a lie that was about to crumble. I'm listening, I replied. The number on my laptop screen made no sense. I refreshed the page 3 times, certain. There was a glitch, a misplaced decimal point that would bring it back to reality. But the balance didn't change, $127 million. Mr. Preston, are you still there? Heinrich Decke's voice pulled me from my shock. This can't be real, I managed to say, clutching the phone as if it might vanish. There must be some mistake. There is no mistake, replied, his German accent weighing each word. This account has been growing for 29 years waiting for this moment. The money, Mr. Preston, is only the beginning of what you need to understand. I clicked on the account history, scrolling through decades of deposits. They began in 1996, 3 years before I was born. Regular transfers coming from something called Project Prometheus, government serial numbers, federal routing codes. The final deposit was made on October 15, 1999. Day my mother died. Your mother, Mr. Preston, was not who you thought she was. Deke continued. Diane Rousseau was not just a secretary. She was Senior Special Agent Diane Rousseau of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. She was undercover at Torna Industries as part of a 3-year investigation into your father's money laundering operation. The room started to spin. I had to put my head between my knees to keep from passing out. That's impossible. She was just his secretary. They had an affair. The affair was real, Deke said softly. That was the problem. Agent Rousseau fell in love with her target. You were never supposed to exist. When she became pregnant, she tried to pull out of the operation. She wanted to tell Victor everything. Find a way out that would protect you both. But Victor found out first, I said, pieces clicking into place in my mind. Yes. He discovered her true identity when you were 2 years old, then something unexpected happened. Victor had fallen in love with her too. And despite everything, he loved you. The child who was never supposed to exist became the only genuine thing in his world of calculated transactions. I thought of all those years of cold distance, the refusal to call me his son, the constant reminders that I didn't belong. If he loved me, he had a strange way of showing it, kept you at a distance to protect you. Mr. Preston, your brothers, Garrett and Holden, were already being groomed to take over the criminal enterprise. They were 13 and 10 when your mother died, old enough to be dangerous if they knew the truth. If they found out you were the son of an FBI agent, that your existence threatened everything they stood to inherit, what do you think would have happened? My mother's murder suddenly made sense. They killed her, I whispered. Not personally, but when Derek learned your mother's true identity, he told Holden. Together, they hired someone to cut her brake lines. They were children, but they were Torna children raised to see threats and eliminate them. Victor found out what they had done when it was too late. He covered it up. He made a choice, turn his sons over for murder. Tech, the only innocent person in the whole equation. Me, I said, rage rising in my throat. So he made a deal with the FBI. Your mother had gathered 3 years of evidence before her death. Everything needed to destroy the Torna empire. Victor would continue to run the operation, feeding information to the Bureau, helping them catch bigger fish. In exchange, they would leave the empire standing until his death, ensuring you grew up protected, if not loved. And the money, your mother had already begun converting evidence into assets, preparing to run with you. She liquidated intelligence, sold information to competitors, moved money through channels that would take decades to trace. It was her insurance policy. When she died, Victor continued the work, adding to the account every year, every crime your brothers committed, every dollar they stole. He matched it in your account. The tainted money they are inheriting today was built on the same foundation as your fortune. The difference is, yours is clean. I stood up, pacing my small apartment, trying to process 28 years of lies crumbling in minutes. There is more, Deke said. Check your secure messages in the account. I clicked on the Messages tab. Hundreds of files appeared. Financial records, photographs, recorded conversations, evidence of every crime committed by Tornado Industries over 3 decades. The most recent files were different. They dated back the last 5 years, and all centered on Garrett and Holden. Your brothers are not just inheriting wealth today, Mr. Preston, they are inheriting a criminal empire. They have expanded it with enthusiasm, adding murder, extortion, and human trafficking to the family business. Your father documented it all. He wanted you to have the choice. He never gave himself. You can disappear with your fortune, or you can see justice done. The evidence is all there, admissible in court. Undeniable. I stared at the files, finally understanding what Victor's last words meant. Character determines worth. He wasn't mocking me. He was passing judgment on us all. I sat on that power for 3 days. $127 million. And enough evidence to destroy everything my brothers had just celebrated. The rational part of me said to take the money and disappear to build a new life far from the torn legacy of blood and lies. I couldn't stop thinking about my mother dying alone on that highway, and the 13-year-old boy who ordered her death, now sipping champagne in a Manhattan penthouse. On the 4th day, I made my decision. I transferred $10 million to a new account, enough to build the life I wanted, but not so much that I would lose myself in wealth I hadn't earned. The rest would stay where it was growing, waiting, a monument to my mother's sacrifice that I didn't need to claim. Then I prepared 2 packages. The first was for the FBI, containing every file from the account, every document my father had gathered, every crime my brothers had committed in their rush to expand the empire. The second package was for Raymond Finch, with specific instructions. Deliver it to my brothers at exactly 2 p.m. on Tuesday, the same time they had laughed at my envelope. I booked a one-way flight to Zurich for Monday night. The arrests happened on Tuesday afternoon. I watched it from my hotel room in Switzerland as CNN broke the story. Federal agents raiding the tornado industry's headquarters. Garrett being led out in handcuffs, his face a mask of confusion and fury. Holden trying to flee, tackled in the garage he had just inherited. The headlines called it the largest takedown of a financial crimes operation in New York history. 3 decades of money laundering, extortion, and murder crumbling in a single afternoon. My package to them contained only 1 sheet of paper, the same aged stock Victor had used for my envelope. The message was short: character determines worth, enjoy what you deserve. The son who was never supposed to exist. Within hours all assets were frozen. Properties, the yachts, the cars, all seized by federal authorities. Simone was caught trying to flee to Milan with suitcases full of jewelry. Miranda was arrested at the yacht club, still trying to register boats she no longer owned. The empire built on blood. Money collapsed completely, taking everyone involved down with it, except for one person. Me. After that changed my name, I became someone new in a country that understands the value of reinvention. The $10 million I took was more than enough to build something real. I started a foundation for children who lose parents to violence, boys and girls who know what it means to be collateral damage in someone else's war. We've helped 300 families already, offering them the one thing I never had: someone to look at their pain and say that it matters. Heinrich still manages the main account. It has grown to over $200 million in investments, of fortune that doubles every decade. He calls me once a year on the anniversary of my mother's death, always with the same question: will you be claiming it this year, Mr. Preston? And I always give the same answer: the son who was never supposed to exist is doing just fine without it, because that's what I finally understood. Sitting in that Swiss hotel room, watching my brothers' lives fall apart on international television, Victor gave them exactly what they always wanted: the Torna Empire with every poisoned dollar of it. And he gave me what I never knew. I needed freedom from it all. My mother died trying to save me from that life. Victor lived by keeping me at arm's length to protect me from it. Every cold shoulder, every public denial, every reminder that I didn't belong, it wasn't rejection. It was preservation. He made me strong enough to survive without his love, because he knew one day I would have to survive without his protection. The real inheritance wasn't the money, or the evidence, or even the truth. It was the chance to choose who I wanted to be when everything I thought defined me was stripped away. Garrett and Holden never had that choice. They were born into the empire, raised to run it, and in the end, destroyed by it. But I was the son who was never supposed to exist, which meant I was free to exist however I wanted. Sometimes I walk past banks in Zurich and think about those millions sitting there, growing like a golden tumor. Sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if I had claimed it all. Then I remember my mother dying to get me away from the source of that money. And Victor living in a calculated coldness to protect me from its corruption. And I walk on because some inheritance are too heavy to carry, some fortunes cost more than they are worth. Sometimes the greatest wealth is discovering you already have enough. That's the truth about being the son who was never supposed to exist. When you accept it, you are free to exist entirely on your own terms.